The salt-stung air of the North Atlantic was a physical blow after the sterile, recirculated atmosphere of the submarine. I stood on the swaying transfer platform, a duffel bag at my feet, and watched the dark, churning water. My name is Leo, and I was here because of a debt. Not the financial kind, though that was a factor, but a deeper one. My grandfather had worked on the initial construction of the Ethelred deep-sea research facility back in the 60s. He'd left behind a journal filled with frantic sketches of pressure gradients and equations that bled into paranoid scrawls about the bleed-through and the old geometry. He died in a shipyard accident 2 weeks after, returning to the surface. This job, this inheritance of salt and silence, felt like a way to square something with his ghost. The facility itself was a shock. It wasn't the sleek, futuristic complex I'd imagined from the briefing packets. It was a brutalist, gunmetal gray collection of interconnected pods and tubes crusted with barnacles and phosphorescent algae sunk into a sheer rock face a mile below the surface. It looked less like a laboratory and more like a forgotten fortress, a thing that had been enduring the crush of the deep long before we ever arrived to poke at it. The transfer submersible, a cramped, buzzing thing they called the Water Strider, had deposited me here, at airlock Gamma, with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The pilot, a woman with a face like worn leather, hadn't spoken a word to me the entire 3-hour descent. She just pointed a thick glove at the airlock door before the hatch sealed and she was gone, swallowed by the abyssal black. The airlock cycled with a series of clunks and groans. The inner door slid open to reveal a man who looked as worn and functional as the facility itself. He was probably in his late 50s, with a shaved head and a beard that was more salt than pepper. He wore a standard-issue gray jumpsuit, the name Hardy stitched over the left breast in block letters. He said, his voice a low rumble that didn't invite disagreement. It wasn't a question. I'm Hardy, facility supervisor. Your ride get you here in one piece? Yes, sir, I said, hefting my duffel. Don't call me sir. Hardy's fine. Follow me. Keep up. He turned and walked down the corridor without another word. I scrambled after him, my boots ringing on the grated metal floor. The lighting was a dim, jaundiced yellow, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was cold and carried a complex scent of ozone, stale coffee, and something else, something metallic and faintly organic, like the smell of a storm over a tidal flat. He led me through a maze of identical corridors, past sealed doors labeled with alphanumeric codes. I saw no one else. The silence was profound, broken only by the constant, low hum of machinery and the distant, rhythmic thump of what I assumed were the pressure equalizers. Your quarters, Hardy said, stopping at a door marked B14. He handed me a keycard. It was heavy, cold, metal, not plastic. You're on the day shift. Your shift starts at 6 a.m. and ends at 6 p.m. sharp. My shift is the night. You will not be here during my shift. Understood? Understood, I said. Good. Stow your gear. You get one personal item, nothing with a speaker. Then meet me in the comms hub. It's 2 lefts and a right from here. Don't get lost. The room was a cell, a cot, a small desk bolted to the floor, a wall-mounted locker, a single porthole, reinforced with crisscrossing bars of metal, looked out into the absolute blackness of the deep. I unpacked my duffel, placing my clothes in the locker. The one personal item I'd brought was my grandfather's journal. I laid it on the desk. It felt like an anchor, a tether to a world of sun and air. The comms hub was a circular room dominated by a bank of flickering monitors and radio equipment. Hardy was sitting in a swivel chair, sipping from a chipped ceramic mug. He gestured to a chair opposite him. Sit. I sat. You're here because you have a background in marine acoustics and because you passed the psyche evals, he began, his eyes never leaving my face. The work itself is straightforward. You'll be monitoring the hydrophone arrays on the western ridge, cataloging bioacoustic signatures, the usual. The pay is good. You'll be here for a 6-month rotation, but the work isn't the job. The job is following the procedures. This isn't a research station, Leo. It's a listening post, and we're not the only ones listening. He took a long sip from his mug. We've had incidents. People have been going missing down here, 3 in the last 18 months. The official reports call it deep-sea psychosis, accidental depressurization. That's bullshit. They broke the rules. So, you listen to me, and you listen good. This isn't a suggestion box. This is the only thing that stands between you and joining the list of the missing. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of laminated paper. He slid it across the console towards me. Read this. Memorize it. You will be tested on it. When you are not on shift, this document stays in this room. You do not copy it. You do not photograph it. You do not discuss it over open channels. Am I clear? Crystal, I said, my throat dry. I picked up the laminated sheet. The text was in a small, utilitarian font. 1. Your shift begins at 6 a.m. and ends at 6 p.m. You must be within your quarters between the hours of 6:15 p.m. and 5:45 a.m. The door must be locked from the inside. 2. The facility is patrolled by a night maintenance crew. You do not acknowledge them. You do not make eye contact. If you pass one in the corridor during your shift, you look at the floor until they are 10 feet past you. 3. The seawater in the laboratory aquariums, specifically tanks 7 through 12 inches, lab beta, will sometimes appear to be boiling. This is a localized pressure phenomenon. Do not report it. Do not approach the tanks to investigate. Log it as a pressure anomaly at the end of your shift if you must. 4. At precisely 10:17 a.m. and 3:33 p.m., a low-frequency hum will be audible throughout the facility. This is a generator test. It will last for 4 minutes. During this time, you will not use the radio. You will sit quietly at your station until it passes. 5. The internal mapping system is incorrect. Corridor D7 is listed as 40 feet long. It is 53 feet long. Always count your steps. If you count 44 paces and have not reached the junction, turn around immediately and return the way you came. Do not run. 6. You will receive a radio check from the surface on Channel 4 every 4 hours. The dispatcher will identify as Nestor. If you receive a check on any other channel, or if the voice identifies as anything else, you will not respond. You will turn the radio off for 15 minutes. 7. The water from the mess hall tap is safe. The water from the tap in the washroom next to Lab Gamma is not. It will smell faintly of brine and almonds. Do not drink it. Do not use it to wash. 8. If you hear a child crying, it is a pressure differential in the ventilation system. The sound originates from the aft ventilation shaft. Do not investigate. Put on your issued headphones and listen to the provided white noise track until the sound ceases. 9. All personal mirrors must be stowed in your locker during your off-shift hours. The reflective surface on the back of your data pad is sufficient for grooming. Number 10. The emergency floodlights in the hallways are motion activated. If they activate in a corridor you have just vacated, do not look back. Proceed to the next secure room and wait for 5 minutes before continuing. 11. Your shadow will not always match your movements. This is a known issue with the low-frequency lighting. Ignore it. 12. If, during your patrol, you find a door that is slightly ajar that should be sealed, do not close it. Note its location and report it at the end of your shift log. The maintenance crew will handle it. 13. You may sometimes see figures moving in the darkness outside the viewports. They are bioluminescent siphonophores. Do not flash lights at them. Do not attempt to communicate. 14. The most important rule. You are alone on the day shift. There is no one else. If you see someone who is not you or a member of the night maintenance crew, you are experiencing a hallucination. Return to your quarters immediately and lock the door. Do not engage. I read the list twice. My mind recoiled from the sheer, stark absurdity of it. Boiling water that wasn't boiling? Shadows with a mind of their own? A maintenance crew you weren't allowed to look at? It read like a parody of a paranoid's manifesto. I looked up at Hardy, expecting to see a hint of a joke in his eyes. There was none. His gaze was flat, hard, and utterly serious. "Questions?" he asked. I had 100. I swallowed them all. This was the job. This was the debt. "No," I said. "No questions." "Good." He took the laminated sheet back and locked it in the drawer. "Your first shift starts tomorrow. Get some sleep. And Leo, welcome to Ethelred." The chronometer on my datapad glowed 5:55 a.m. I had been awake for an hour, lying in my bunk and staring at the ceiling. I'd slept fitfully, my dreams haunted by the silent, faceless forms of the night maintenance crew and the sound of my own footsteps echoing in a corridor that stretched on forever. The rules cycled through my mind, a litany of the insane. Ignore your shadow. Don't close the door. You are alone. At 5:58 a.m., I unlocked my door and stepped out into the corridor. The lights were still on their night cycle, a dim, pervasive red that made the metal hallways look like the arteries of some vast, slumbering beast. The hum of the machinery seemed deeper, more resonant. I made my way to the mess hall, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence. The mess was empty. I made a cup of bitter, synthetic coffee and sat at one of the long tables. At exactly 6 a.m., the red lights flickered and switched to the dull yellow of the day cycle. The transition was jarring. A few minutes later, a man walked in. He was young, maybe early 20s, with a nervous energy and hair that looked like it had been cut with welding shears. "You must be Leo," he said, his voice too loud for the room. "I'm Finn, acoustics tech. Hardy said you'd be starting today. Don't worry, I'll show you the ropes." He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. They darted around the room, never settling for long. "Thanks," I said. "First rule of Ethelred," Finn said, pouring his own coffee. "The coffee is always terrible. Second rule, well, you've read the list, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, so you know, it's all a bit mad, but you get used to it. Mostly it's just boring. Mind-numbingly, soul-crushingly boring, until it's not." He took a gulp of the scalding liquid. "Come on, I'll walk you to the lab." The acoustics lab, my primary workstation, was a small, windowless room lined with servers and monitor banks. A large screen displayed a real-time spectrogram of the hydrophone feeds, a constantly shifting waterfall of green and blue lines against a black background. "This is your throne," Finn said, slapping one of the chairs. "You're monitoring Array Theta, out on the western ridge. Mostly you'll just hear shrimp snapping in the tact, occasional whale fart. But if you see a sustained, patterned signal in the 1 to 10 Hz range, you tag it and alert Hardy immediately. No exceptions." "What is it?" I asked. "No idea. We call it the churn. It's probably just geological, tectonic plates, grinding. But protocol is protocol." He shrugged. "Your first patrol is at 8 a.m. I'll do it with you today, show you the route." The next 2 hours were spent learning the lab's systems. It was familiar work, the kind of data analysis I'd done for years. The crushing normality of it was a comfort, a bulwark against the strangeness of the rules. At 5 minutes to 8, Finn stood up. "Patrol time. Gotta do the walk. It's a full circuit of the outer habitation ring. Takes about 25 minutes if you don't dawdle." He opened a locker and took out 2 heavy-duty flashlights. Never know when a light might blow. We left the lab and started down the main corridor. Habitation Wing A. The route was straightforward, a large, squared-off loop. Finn chattered incessantly about nothing, sports teams from a world that felt a million miles away, the terrible food, a woman named Anya on the surface he was hoping to see after his rotation. I listened with half an ear, my focus on the environment. I counted my steps. I noted the numbers on the doors. I listened for anything that wasn't the hum. It was in Corridor D7 that I felt the first prickle of unease, the one the rules had specifically mentioned. According to the map on the wall, It was a straight shot of 40 feet between two junctions. I started counting my steps. My stride was roughly 2.5 feet. 16 steps should have put me at the end. I reached 16 steps. The junction was still ahead of me. 17, 18. My heart began to beat a little faster. Finn was still talking, seemingly oblivious. 19, 20. The corridor stretched on, the perspective seeming just slightly off, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. I reached 22 paces before my foot finally crossed the threshold of the far junction. 55 feet, not 40. The rule was right. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't a typo. The facility itself was wrong. "You okay?" Finn asked, noticing I'd fallen silent. "Fine," I said, my voice tight, just taking it all in. He gave me a knowing look. "D7, right? Gets everyone the first time. You get used to it. Your brain just learns to ignore it after a while." We completed the rest of the patrol without incident. At 10:17 a.m., we were back in the lab. The low-frequency hum started right on schedule. It was a physical sensation more than a sound. A deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come up through the floor and into my bones. It made my teeth ache. Finn immediately stopped talking, put down his datapad, and sat perfectly still, staring at the wall. Remembering the rule, I did the same. The 4 minutes felt like an hour. When it stopped, the silence that followed was deafening. Finn let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. Generator test, always on time. Creepy as hell, but you get used to that too. The rest of the day passed without event. I did another solo patrol at 1 p.m., counting my steps meticulously in D7, 53 feet again. I ate a bland lunch in the mess alone. I monitored the hydrophones, hearing only the predictable chorus of the deep. At 3:33 p.m., the hum returned. I sat through it again, the vibration settling deep in my marrow. At 5:45 p.m., I powered down my station. Finn had already left, with a quick wave and a "see you tomorrow." I walked back to my quarters, my footsteps echoing in the now familiar corridors. The sense of isolation was immense. I was alone in a metal can at the bottom of the ocean, governed by a set of instructions that defied all logic. I locked my door at 6:10 p.m., the bolt sliding home with a prost, solid, final thunk. I sat on my bunk, listening. The hum of the machinery was different at night, layered with other, subtler sounds. A faint, rhythmic scraping that might have been metal on metal, or something else. A series of taps, like pebbles being dropped against the outer hull. I thought about the night maintenance crew. Were they out there now? What were they maintaining? Then I heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. A child's cry, thin and reedy, filtering through the ventilation grate near the ceiling. My blood ran cold. It sounded so real, so helpless. Every instinct screamed at me to go and look, to find the source. A kid? Down here? It was impossible. It had to be. I fumbled in my locker for the bulky, sound-dampening headphones I'd been issued. I put them on and activated the white noise of bland, hissing static. The crying was gone, swallowed by the artificial roar. I sat there for a long time, the headphones clamped over my ears, until the chronometer read 9 p.m. Only then did I take them off. The silence in my room was absolute. The crying had stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark, my grandfather's journal on my chest, and listened to the deep. The rules were no longer a joke. They were a shield, and I had just begun to understand how thin that shield really was. The days settled into a grim, procedural rhythm. Wake up at 5:45 a.m. Shave using the reflection from my data pad. Unlock the door at 5:58. Coffee in the empty mess. Work in the lab. Patrol at 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. Sit through the 10:17 and 3:33 hums. Power down. Return to my room. Lock the door. Listen. I saw the night maintenance crew twice during my second week. The first time, I was returning from the lab a few minutes late. At 6:12 p.m., I turned a corner, and there he was, maybe 30 feet away. A figure in the same gray jumpsuit, his back to me, mopping the floor with slow, deliberate strokes. I froze, then remembered Rule 2. I dropped my gaze to the grill floor, focusing on a specific bolt. I heard the soft, wet sound of the mop, the squeak of his boots. He passed behind me. I didn't look up until I had counted to 10 after the sounds had faded. When I glanced back, the corridor was empty. The floor was dry. The second time was more disconcerting. I was on my 1 p.m. patrol, walking down the main thoroughfare of Habitation Wing B. A maintenance crewman was up ahead, kneeling before an open access panel, his tools spread out on a cloth beside him. As I approached, the rule echoing in my head, I averted my eyes, but not before I saw it. The emblem on his jumpsuit shoulder wasn't the Ethelred logo, a stylized A encircled by a wave. It was something else, a simpler, older design I couldn't quite make out. A trident? A key? I forced my head down, my heart hammering against my ribs. I counted my steps until I was well past him. Camouflage warnings, the rules had said. A coworker with the wrong jacket emblem. I didn't report it. The rules said not to acknowledge them. Reporting it felt like a form of acknowledgement. I just logged my patrol as uneventful and tried to forget the wrongness of that symbol burned into my peripheral vision. The anomalies were small, but relentless. One afternoon, I was in Lab Beta collecting a sensor cartridge. I'd avoided the place since reading Rule 3, but the task was unavoidable. The lab was silent, filled with the soft gurgle of water pumps. Tanks 7 through 12 were along the far wall. As I worked, I heard a distinct, vigorous bubbling. I looked over. The water in Tank 9 was churning, thick, streams of bubbles rising from the bottom, exactly like a pot of water coming to a rolling boil. But the temperature gauge on the side of the tank read a constant 4 degrees Celsius. I turned my back on it, my skin crawling, and finished my work as quickly as I could. I did not log it. The shadows were the hardest to ignore. It was always in the corner of my eye. I'd be reaching for a tool, and my shadow's arm would lag a half-second behind, or it would seem to point in a slightly different direction. It was a subtle, persistent gaslighting of my own senses. I learned to not look. I learned to focus on the concrete, the tangible, the number of steps, the time on the chronometer, the count of backup battery cells in the storage locker, 24, always 24. Finn was my only human contact. His chatter was a lifeline to normalcy, even if it was frayed at the edges. He'd been here for 4 months. He was jumpier than he'd first appeared. He flinched at unexpected sounds. He'd developed a habit of tapping his fingers in a complex, rhythmic pattern on his leg, over and over. "You get used to it," he'd say for the 100th time, but he was trying to convince himself as much as me. One day, about 3 weeks into my rotation, we were doing the 1 p.m. patrol together. We were in the service corridor that ran behind the main labs, a narrower, colder passage with exposed pipes running along the ceiling. It was Finn's turn to lead. We passed a heavy, pressure-sealed door marked Auxiliary Pump Control, Authorized Personnel Only. The door was supposed to be sealed. It was always sealed. Today, it was open, just a crack, a dark, 2-inch sliver revealing nothing but blackness. Finn stopped dead. "Hell," he whispered. My mind raced. Rule 12. If you find a door that is slightly ajar that should be sealed, do not close it. Note its location and report it at the end of your shift log. "We just note it," I said, my voice low. "We keep going." "Yeah," Finn said, but he didn't move. He was staring at the crack. "It's never been opened before." "Finn, let's go." "What if someone's in there?" he said, his voice taking on a strange, eager tone. "What if it's one of the missing? They could be trapped, hurt." "The rule, Finn, we don't close it. The maintenance crew handles it." "The maintenance crew," he snorted, a bitter edge to his voice. "You really trust them? You see the way they look at us? Or rather, the way we're not allowed to look at them?" He took a step towards the door. Finn, no. Just a quick peek. Leo, what if it's Miller? He had a wife, kids. Miller was the last one to go missing, 2 months before I arrived. It was a powerful lure, wrapped in the guise of heroism. The temptation to break the rule for a noble cause, to do something. I felt it too, a pull towards that darkness. But my grandfather's journal, filled with his own descent into rule-breaking paranoia, was a stark warning. It's a rule for a reason, I said, more firmly. We note it and move on. Finn's hand hovered near the door handle. I saw the conflict warring on his face, the desire to know, to help, against the drilled-in discipline. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to pull it open. Then he let out a shuddering breath and pulled his hand back as if the metal were red hot. Yeah, you're right, stupid. Let's just finish the patrol. We walked on, the image of that dark sliver seared into my mind. We didn't speak for the rest of the circuit. When we returned to the lab, Finn immediately logged the ajar door in the shift report. His hands were shaking. That night, locked in my room, I thought about the door. I thought about the temptation. It wasn't a monster that was the threat here. It was our own humanity, our curiosity, our compassion. The rules were designed to strip that away, to make us cold, procedural machines. It was the only way to survive. The next morning, there was a new sheet of paper waiting for me in the comms hub, tucked under Hardy's coffee mug. The heading read, Amendments to Operational Protocol. Read it, Hardy grunted. The first incident of a new rotation always triggers an update. I picked it up. The cold laminate felt like a tombstone. 1. Amendment to Rule 5. The discrepancy in Corridor D7 has been confirmed as variable. The length may fluctuate between 48 and 58 feet. The step count for a return remains 44. If you count beyond 44, turn back. 2. Amendment to Rule 6. Radio checks from Nestor will now include a daily code phrase. The phrase for today is Kingfisher. If the code is incorrect or no code is given, follow the existing non-response protocol. 3. New Rule 15. The auxiliary pump control door is to be visually inspected from a distance of no less than 10 feet during each patrol. It must appear fully sealed. If it is ajar, do not approach closer than 10 feet. Log it immediately as a Priority 1 alert. 4. New Rule 16. All personal data pads must be visually verified against the assigned user at the start of each shift. Check the serial number. If the number does not match the one on your issued tag, do not use the pad. Place it in the designated locker in the comms hub. 5. New Rule 17. If you encounter another day shift employee who suggests breaking a protocol or who exhibits recruiting behavior, you are to disengage immediately and report the interaction to the supervisor at the earliest safe opportunity. 6. New Rule 18. The white noise track on your headphones is the only authorized track. If you hear anything else through the headphones, music, whispering, or a distorted version of the white noise, remove them at once and report to your quarters. Do not use them again until they have been swapped by maintenance. I looked up at Hardy. Recruiting, behavior, his face was grim. Sometimes, the loneliness or the pressure, it gets to people. They start to think the rules are the enemy. They try to get others to see it their way. It never ends well. He paused, his eyes boring into me. Be careful, Leo. Trust the rules, nothing else. I thought of Finn, his hand hovering over the pump room door, the eagerness in his voice. Had that been the start of it? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the facility's recycled air. The rules weren't just a shield against the outside. They were a quarantine for the sickness within us. The siege began not with a bang, but with a light going out. It was a Tuesday, my 5th week down. I was on my 8 a.m. patrol, alone. I was in the long, curving corridor of the observatory wing, which featured a series of large, reinforced viewports looking out into the abyss. The lights in this section were motion activated, and they flickered on in sequence ahead of me as I walked. I was halfway down the corridor when the light directly above me went out. It didn't flicker. It didn't die with a pop. It just ceased to be, plunging a 20-foot section around me into near darkness, illuminated only by the spill from the lights ahead and behind. I stopped, my hand going to the flashlight on my belt. Rule 10. If they activate in a corridor you have just vacated, do not look back. This was different. This was a failure in the space I currently occupied. I stood perfectly still, listening. The hum was there, the distant thump of the pressure equalizers, and something else, a wet, dragging sound, slow and heavy, coming from the darkened section ahead of me. It was the sound of something massive being pulled across the grill floor. My every instinct screamed at me to turn on the flashlight, to see what was there, but the rules were silent on this specific scenario. I had to extrapolate. Don't look. Don't investigate. Proceed. I took a step forward, into the darkness. The dragging sound stopped. I took another step. My breath plumed in the suddenly frigid air. I could see the next pool of light, 30 feet away. I focused on it. I walked, my steps measured, my eyes fixed ahead. I did not look to the sides. I did not look back. I was 10 feet from the edge of the darkness when I heard a voice from the viewport to my right. It was Finn's voice, but thin, strained, as if coming from a great distance. Leo, help me. I'm out here. I fell. The airlock, it just opened. It was a lie, a vicious, personalized lure. Finn was safe in the lab. He had to be, but the voice was perfect, filled with genuine terror and pain. Don't acknowledge. It's a hallucination. I kept walking. Leo, please. I can see you. Don't leave me out here. The voice was closer now, right beside my ear. I felt a phantom coldness on my cheek. I clenched my jaw and kept my eyes forward. 5 more steps. The light was just ahead. A shape moved in the periphery of my left eye, in the blackness between the viewports. It was tall and impossibly thin, a silhouette that seemed to be made of shifting, condensed shadow. It didn't walk. It unfolded, segment by segment, rising to the ceiling. I broke into a run. I burst out of the darkened section and into the light, my heart trying to claw its way out of my throat. I didn't stop until I was back at the junction, under the bright, unwavering glow of a primary hallway light. I leaned against the wall, gasping. I looked back. The darkened section was still there, a void in the middle of the lit corridor. As I watched, the lights flickered once, twice, and then came back on, illuminating the empty passage. The dragging sound was gone. Finn's voice was silent. I finished the patrol at a near jog, my report log a mess of terse, clipped sentences. When I got back to the lab, Finn was there, humming to himself and analyzing a data set. He looked up as I entered. "You okay, Leo? You look like you've seen a ghost." I just stared at him, my breath still coming in ragged gulps. The rules were right. I was alone, and I was surrounded. The following week was the true descent. The facility, it seemed, had decided I was worth testing. The anomalies escalated from eerie background noise to a sustained, deliberate campaign of psychological warfare. It started with the radio. The daily check from Nestor on Channel 4 had become a cornerstone of my routine. The voice was always the same, a calm, slightly bored male voice. "Aethelred, this is Nestor. Comms check. Code, Kingfisher. Over." And I would respond, "Nestor. Aethelred. Read you. 5x5. Out." One afternoon, at the 2 p.m. check, the voice was different. It was a woman's voice, sharp and professional. "Ethelred. Surface control. Comms check. Do you read?" "Over." My hand froze over the transmit button. Rule 6 was clear. Channel 4, Nestor. This was not Nestor. I waited. 15 seconds later, it came again. "Aethelred. This is surface control. Please respond." We are showing a fault in your primary data uplink. Over. It sounded so real. A fault? That could be serious. But the rule was the rule. I reached out and turned the radio off. The silence in the comms hub was heavy. I watched the clock. 15 minutes. I counted each second. When I turned it back on, the first thing that crackled through was the familiar, bored voice. Aethelred, Nestor, comms check. Code, Kingfisher. Over. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Nestor, Aethelred, read you 5x5. Out. The next temptation was more subtle. I was in my Morferhate quarters. During the dead hours, between 8 p.m. and midnight. I was reading my grandfather's journal, trying to find some solace in his familiar, frantic handwriting. I had my headphones on, the white noise a steady hiss. Then, faintly, underneath the static, I heard it. Music. A few bars of a lullaby my mother used to sing to me when I was sick. It was so clear, so perfectly rendered, that tears sprang to my eyes. It was a hook set deep in the core of my childhood. I almost left it on. I almost let it wash over me. But then I remembered Amendment 6. If you hear anything else, remove them at once. It was a lure, tailored just for me. With a convulsive jerk, I ripped the headphones from my ears and threw them onto the bunk as if they were venomous. The sudden, absolute silence was a shock. I sat there, trembling, the ghost of the lullaby echoing in my mind. I did not put the headphones on again. The third event was the breach. Not mine, Finn's. He had been growing increasingly bowed, erratic. The tapping was constant. He'd started muttering to himself, arguing with someone who wasn't there. He'd begun questioning the rules openly. Why can't we look at them, Leo? What are they hiding? What if they're not maintenance at all? What if they're the ones in charge? I'd tried to placate him, to reinforce the protocol. It doesn't matter, Finn. The rule is there. We follow it. Blind obedience, he'd sneered. That's how people end up missing. Nobody asks why. The crisis happened during the 3:33 p.m. hum. We were in the lab. The deep vibration started, and as per protocol, we both fell silent. I sat at my station, staring at the spectrogram, waiting for the 4 minutes to pass. Finn, however, remained standing. I could see him out of the corner of my eye, fidgeting, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I can't, he whispered, his voice strained. I can't just sit. It's in my head. It's talking to me. Finn, sit down, I said, my voice low but firm. It's just a generator test. It's not, he shouted, his voice cracking. The hum seemed to swallow the sound. It's a voice. It's telling me to open the door. My blood went cold. What door? The door. The one that's always locked. In the floor. Down in the wet lab. He was pacing now, his hands clawing at his hair. There was no wet lab on the schematics. There was no door in the floor. This was new. This was the sickness the breakdown Rule 17 had warned against. Finn, you're hallucinating. Sit down, now. He ignored me. The hum reached its peak, the vibration so intense it made my vision blur. With a sudden, decisive movement, Finn lunged for the lab door and wrenched it open. I have to let it in, he screamed, and he ran out into the corridor. The rule was absolute. I was not to leave during the hum. I was to sit quietly. But he was my partner. He was braking. I hesitated. For 3 precious seconds, the conflict between protocol and humanity tearing me in two. Then I broke my own rule. I got up and ran after him. The corridor was empty. The hum was a physical wall of sound. I saw him disappear around a corner, heading not towards any known lab, but towards the service corridors, the oldest, least used part of the facility. I sprinted after him, my boots slipping on the grill. I rounded the corner just in time to see him stop before a section of blank, riveted wall. There was no door, but Finn was acting like there was. He was fumbling at the wall, his fingers scrabbling for a purchase that wasn't there. It's here. I can feel the lock, he cried. Finn, there's nothing there. Come back. He turned to look at me. and his face was a mask of terror and ecstasy. "It's opening!" And then the hum stopped. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. In that sudden void, Finn's expression shifted. The ecstasy vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated horror. He looked at the wall, then at his hands, then at me. "Leo?" he whispered. "What did I do?" A deep, groaning sound echoed through the corridor, a sound of metal stressed beyond its limits. It didn't come from the wall. It came from the ceiling, the floor, all around us. A fine mist of cold salt water began to spray from the seams in the ceiling panels. Finn took a step towards me, his hand outstretched. Then the lights went out. The emergency floodlights snapped on, casting the corridor in a stark, blue-white glare. They were motion-activated, and they lit in a sequence down the hall, away from us, as if something was moving there. I didn't wait. I grabbed Finn by the arm and pulled him. He was limp, compliant, in a state of shock. We ran. We didn't stop until we were back in the acoustics lab. I slammed the door shut and engaged the manual lock, something I'd never had to do before. We sat in the dark, listening. The groaning had stopped. The spraying had stopped, but the emergency lights in the corridor outside remained on, illuminating nothing. Finn didn't speak for the rest of the shift. He just sat in his chair, rocking slightly, staring at his hands. At 6 p.m., I walked him to his quarters. He went inside without a word. I never saw him again. The next morning, his quarters were empty. His bed was made. His personal effects were gone. There was no note. When I asked Hardy, his face was like granite. He transferred out. The Strider came early. He couldn't handle the pressure. It was a lie. We both knew it. The water Strider hadn't come. The log showed no submersible activity. Finn was just gone. He had broken the rules. He had listened to the hum. He had tried to open a door that didn't exist. And he had paid the price. The following day, a new amendments list was waiting. It was shorter, sharper, more desperate. 1. Amendment to Rule 4. The hum is an acoustic quarantine measure. During its activation, all personnel must be seated and must hum a single, constant note to create an auditory buffer. The recommended note is C below middle C. 2. New Rule 19. There is no wet lab. There is no door in the floor. Any mention of these concepts, either audibly or in writing, is a sign of Stage 3, acoustic assimilation. The affected personnel must be isolated in their quarters immediately. 3. New Rule 20. The emergency lights are not to be trusted. If they activate without clear cause, you are to retreat to the nearest designated safe room. List appended: Comms Hub, your quarters, Lab Alpha, and barricade the door until the primary lighting is restored. 4. New Rule 21. All logs and reports must now be filed in duplicate. The second copy is to be placed in the physical safe in the Comms Hub. This is non-negotiable. I read the list, my hands steady. There was no fear anymore. There was only procedure. Finn was gone because he had felt. I would survive because I would not. I was becoming a machine of compliance, and in the crushing, silent dark of Aethelred, that was the only thing that mattered. The storm, when it came, was not a weather event in the conventional sense. On the surface, the sensors reported a sudden, violent plankton bloom and a corresponding shift in the abyssal currents. Down here, in the metal bones of Aethelred, it was in siege. It began with the lights. They flickered for an entire hour, dipping to a dull brownout before surging back to a painful brilliance. The hum of the machinery became a ragged, gasping cough. Alarms blared, then cut out, then blared again on different frequencies. The chronometer on my datapad glitched, flashing between the current time and a string of 9s. Hardy's voice crackled over the facility-wide intercom, a thing I hadn't known existed. It was stripped of its usual rumble, tight with a tension I'd never heard before. All personnel, this is Hardy. Initiate emergency protocol Sigma. Repeat, Sigma is in effect. Acknowledge by flashing your room lights twice. I was in my quarters, it being my off shift. I went to the light switch and flicked it off, then on, off, then on. Down the corridor, I saw other lights do the same. A ghostly Morse code in the deep. A new document, printed on bright red paper, had been slid under my door. Emergency protocols. Sigma 1. All non-essential power is to be diverted to the outer hull integrity field. This includes heating to all non-critical areas. Expect temperature drop. 2. Patrols are suspended. You are to remain at your current station. If you are in your quarters, you are to barricade the door using the supplied brackets and toolkit. 3. Radio silence is absolute. The only authorized transmission will be a mayday on Channel 1 if hull breach is imminent. The code phrase for a confirmed catastrophic breach is Deep 6. 4. The things outside will become more active. They will attempt to mimic familiar sounds and voices to lure you to the viewports or airlocks. You are to ignore them. Do not look outside. 5. Inventory your food, water, and oxygen scrubbers. Report your totals via the hardline text terminal in your room to the comms hub. Conserve everything. I got to work. The toolkit was under my bunk. The brackets were heavy steel, designed to be slotted into reinforced receivers on the door frame. I fitted them into place, my movements methodical, precise. The door was now sealed beyond the simple lock. I inventoried my supplies. I had 2 gallons of water, a box of nutrient bars, and the oxygen scrubber indicator was green. I reported the figures via the clunky keyboard and screen terminal mounted on my wall. Then, I waited. The temperature began to plummet. My breath plumed in the air, thick and white. I put on my extra jumpsuit, then wrapped myself in the thin thermal blanket. From my bunk, the cold was a physical presence, seeping through the metal walls. The sounds started soon after. First, it was the knocking. A polite, rhythmic tap-tap-tap on my door. It wasn't the frantic pounding of someone in panic. It was calm, insistent. Hardy's voice followed. "Leo, it's Hardy. The storm knocked out the comms to your quarters. I need you to come to the hub to verify a systems readout." "Open up." It sounded exactly like him. The same timbre, the same cadence. But Rule 4 of the Sigma protocol was clear. They will attempt to mimic, and Hardy would never ask me to break quarantine. I stayed silent, my back against the far wall, my eyes fixed on the barricaded door. The knocking stopped. A few minutes later, a new sound. Crying. A child, sobbing softly right outside my door. "I'm cold," a small voice whimpered. "Please let me in. I'm so scared." I closed my eyes. I thought of the white noise headphones, but I couldn't use them. I hummed my C note, low and steady, creating my own auditory buffer against the lie. The crying shifted, distorted. It became a wet, gurgling sound, then a series of clicks and pops, like shrimp snapping, but amplified, organized. It was a language made of deep-sea sounds. It was trying another key in the lock of my mind. Then, the lights went out completely. The emergency lights in the corridor did not come on. I was plunged into an absolute, profound blackness, the kind of dark that exists only at the bottom of the ocean. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The only senses left were sound and touch. The dragging sound returned, the same wet, heavy dragging I'd heard in the observatory wing. It moved down the corridor outside my room. It was slow, ponderous. It stopped directly outside my door. I held my breath. The humming had died in my throat. Silence. Then, a new sound. A gentle, scraping rustle. It was the sound of something reading the nameplate on my door. The sound of something tracing the letters of my name with a delicate, precise instrument. A voice spoke. It was a composite, a chorus of whispers layered over a fundamental, resonant tone that vibrated in my teeth. It did not come from the door. It seemed to come from the walls, the floor, the air itself. "Leo," it breathed. "We know your grandfather. He was loud, You are so very quiet. We appreciate the silence. It is a rare thing. I did not move. I did not speak. I became a statue in the freezing dark. He tried to draw us, the voice continued, a hint of what might have been amusement in its impossible timbre. He tried to map the old geometry. It broke him. You are wiser. You follow the paths. You are making yourself into a perfect, silent thing. It is pleasing. The scraping started again, this time on the door itself. Not an attempt to break in. A caress. A recognition. We will have the loud one. The voice whispered. The new one. He is already singing our song. But you, we will watch. The dragging sound started again, moving away from my door, down the corridor. The presence receded. I remained frozen for what felt like hours, until, with a sudden flicker, the primary lights stuttered back on. The hum of the machinery returned to its steady, familiar drone. The storm was over. I didn't move until the chronometer read 6 a.m. I disassembled the barricade with numb fingers and unlocked my door. The corridor was empty. There was no sign of what had been there, but etched into the metal of my nameplate, as if by a sharp, fine tool, was a single, complex symbol. It looked like a cross between a nautilus shell and a locking mechanism. I went to the comms hub. Hardy was there, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He had a cut on his forehead, and his hands were wrapped in bandages. You're here, he said, his voice rough. I'm here. Finn? I shook my head. He just nodded, a weary acceptance in his eyes. The Strider will be here in 48 hours with your replacement. Your rotation is being cut short. You'll be on it. I should have felt relief, joy. Instead, I felt a cold, hollow dread. I was leaving. But the thing in the dark had said it would be watching. The last 2 days were a blur of inventory and procedure. I patrolled the silent corridors, counting my steps in D751 feet today. I sat through the hums, my own low C note, a shield against the voices within. I logged the pressure anomalies in tanks 7 to 12 without looking at them. I was the perfect machine. The water strider arrived on schedule. I saw it through the viewport in the transfer bay, its lights like alien stars in the blackness. I felt nothing. I packed my duffel bag. The only personal item I had was my grandfather's journal. I held it in my hands, its weight suddenly foreign. It was an artifact from a world of noise and feeling, a world I was no longer a part of. I opened it to a random page, his scrawl. It speaks in the spaces between the sounds. It hates the constant shapeless noise of life. It seeks the perfect ordered silence. I understood now. The rules weren't just for our safety. They were a negotiation, a treaty. We provided the silence, the order, the strict procedural obedience, and in return, we were mostly left alone. Those who broke the rules introduced noise, chaos, and they were taken, absorbed into the silence, becoming a part of the thing they had disturbed. I left the journal on the desk in my quarters. I didn't need it anymore. Its questions were answered. Hardy was in the comms hub to see me off. He handed me a sealed envelope. For the surface, he said, your final report, and your recommendation for your replacement. I took it. The new time. Guy. What's his name? Does it matter? Hardy replied, his gaze level. No, I thought. It didn't. I walked to the airlock. The pilot of the Strider, a different one this time, a young man with a nervous smile, was waiting. Ready to see the sun? He asked. I didn't answer. I stepped into the submersible and took a seat, staring straight ahead. The hatch sealed with a hiss. As we detached and began our ascent, I did not look back at the fading, gunmetal gray shape of the Ethelred facility. I spent the 3-hour ascent in silence. The pilot tried to make conversation a few times, gave up. When we broke the surface, the sunlight through the viewport was a physical assault. It was too bright, too chaotic, too full of meaningless color. On the deck of the support ship, the air was thick with the smells of salt, diesel, and living things. People moved around with a jarring lack of purpose, laughing, talking, their movements unscripted, unpredictable. It was all noise. I was given a cabin. I sat on the bunk and opened the envelope Hardy had given me. Inside was a standard debriefing form, mostly blank, and a single, clean sheet of paper. At the top it read, Operational Guidelines for Deep Sea Assignment, Aethelred Facility. It was a new rule set, a cleaner, more efficient one. I had written it in my mind over the past 48 hours, refining the old list, stripping away the ambiguity, learning from Finn's breach, from the siege, from the thing in the dark. It was my baton pass, my legacy. I took a pen from the desk and began to write. The words came easily, precisely. They were the only thing that felt real. 1. Your shift begins at 6 a.m. and ends at 6 p.m. You must be within your quarters, with the door locked from the inside, between 6:15 p.m. and 5:45 a.m. 2. You do not acknowledge the night maintenance crew. If you pass one, look at the floor until they are 10 feet past. 3. The water in tanks 7 through 12 will sometimes appear to boil. Do not report it. Do not approach. 4. At 10:17 a.m. and 3:33 p.m., a low-frequency hum will occur. Sit quietly and hum a constant C note until it passes. 5. Corridor D7 is not 40 feet long. Count your steps. If you count 44 and have not reached the junction, turn back. 6. Radio checks are on Channel 4 from Nestor with a daily code. All other calls are false. Do not respond. 7. Do not drink from the washroom tap next to Lab Gamma. 8. All crying is a pressure differential. Do not investigate. 9. Stow personal mirrors. Use your data pad. 10. If emergency lights activate behind you, do not look back. 11. Ignore your shadow. 12. If a door is ajar, do not close it. Log it. 13. The figures outside are siphonophores. Do not communicate. 14. You are alone on the day shift. Anyone else is a hallucination. Return to your quarters. I read it over. It was good. It was complete. It would keep the next person alive, as long as they were willing to become quiet, to become still, to become a part of the machinery. I sealed it in a new envelope and addressed it to the incoming acoustic technician, Aethelred Deep Sea Research Facility. Mournful sound that tore at the fabric of the quiet sea. I flinched, the noise of violation. I looked out the porthole at the vast, empty horizon. Up here, there were no rules. There was only the terrifying, shapeless noise of being alive. I knew, then, that I would never really leave. A part of me was still down there, in the perfect, ordered silence. A silent sentinel in the deep, watching and waiting, following the rules, and waiting for the noise to finally, mercifully, stop.